Good morning. My name is Paul Palmer. Today I want to talk about auditing and the challenges we're all facing at the moment. Now, one of the services I provide is GMP audits, GDP audits, GLP audits, GCP audits. So, really, pharmaceutical audits in whichever type of facility you're interested in. Now, the problem we've got at the moment, of course, is we can't go to places. So historically, the challenges were measuring the audits, scheduling the audits, managing the audit schedule, different things like that. But now really it's how do you manage your schedule using a risk-based approach when you can't go to the site? So I've been involved in remote audits already, participating in conducting remote audits. Now, I do find it's an interesting concept because you can still look closely at the systems, you can still talk to the people, you can still review the SOPs, the records, but you can't see the facility. So how do you orientate yourself so that you understand what's going on? How do you get a satisfactory level of knowledge and visibility of what's going on in the organization? Well, of course you start with the people, but what if they're working from home? So maybe you have to connect with them on some sort of online service. You can talk to them through the camera, like the webcam. SOPs, records, documents. Well, what if they don't want to send you a copy? So you have to share them online, review them in real time, if they're willing to do that. Or it's better to, from my perspective, I've seen sharing documents through some sort of secure portal is a better way. It's more user-friendly, and it doesn't waste people's time. So if somebody's presenting, somebody's receiving, it's similar to what you would do in a normal audit, but remote audits tend to last longer. So allocating the resource for a suitable amount of time can be quite difficult. And what I found is a good way is to spread the audit over a longer period of time, but have a shorter audit period during each day. So I think the best one I've done so far, what do I call it by best? The one that's been most relaxed, that's most achieved the most, that probably is probably the best way. Because when you're auditing, you're looking at risk management. So what do you want to do? Well, you want to assess their abilities to meet your requirements. So where's the biggest risk? Well, having an appropriate quality management system that meets the guidelines, having suitable staff in place, demonstrating that those staff have been trained and assessed as competent. But what else? Well, you want to look at how they view their own subcontractors, how that they assess the suppliers and the customers. And what I've found is that you can have a much more in-depth review by performing a remote audit than on site, because you're not restricted to the 3 days. You can have maybe 1 or 2 hours per day over a 2-week period, talking to the people, explaining what you want from them. Maybe you sent them a list already and they've sent you the documents, and then some questions. And I found that you get through a lot more information with this approach by spreading it over a period of time. Maybe you spend another hour or 2 hours in between and then ask for extra information. And then you have the next face-to-face, and then the next day, the next face-to-face. And it's a lot less stressful than standing there in an audit room and somebody asking you for a document and you're being concerned that it's not arrived in half an hour. And what do you talk about? What do you do? How do you present? Similarly, for the auditor, it can be frustrating sitting there waiting for the next document to arrive. So I found remote audits is actually a really good way of approaching auditing. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't do on-site audits. It means consider the concept of auditing. How should you actually develop your strategy? What's the best use of time? What's most efficient? But more importantly, how do you minimize the risk? How do you eliminate as much risk as you can from your supply chain to make sure that the product you supply is of the right quality, safe, efficacious, and not going to cause damage to the patient, not going to cause harm to the patient. So what I'm proposing for future audits, what I would like to do is have the remote audit, even when we can go on site, to look closely at the systems, the process, the procedures, without the stress of an on-site audit. And then look at the physical requirements on site. Now, because you're not focused on, well, I've got to continue with the documentation this afternoon, a day on site rather than half a day on site allows you to get much more in depth into the facility, the way it's managed, the way it's laid out. Make sure you've got an actual really clear understanding of what they're doing. And any conflicts, anything that's causing risk to your product or service. Okay, we're really talking about products, not a service. But maybe you're talking about transport. And in that day, rather than rushing through the introduction, getting a basic overview, and then rushing to get the point where you start doing your review of your documentation, you can spend a day on site. You can talk to the people. You can understand the systems and processes. But more to the point, you can get an understanding of the culture on site. You can look at some of the records in a more relaxed manner, I suppose, is probably the best way to put it. So that's what I feel that the way that we should be going with audits going forward. Whether that's going to be the case or not, we'll see. Because I'm sure it'll be quite difficult for companies to manage. They need to get the right concepts, the right understanding, the right approach. An accommodating approach, I suppose, is probably the best way to put it. Adaptive, maybe, because different people are working different ways. And with the flexibility of remote audits, it's just increased the number of different ways, not reduced it. So that's it for me for today. Talking about auditing, remote auditing. I quite like it. I hope you do too.